Hello, my name's Nick Young and I'm a partner at DAC Beechcroft. Today I'd like to look at two environmental developments and their implications for the insurance industry, from brokers and underwriters through to claims handlers. First, I'm going to look at the Energy Act 2011, whose impact, perhaps surprisingly, does not seem to have received a high profile within the industry. Then I'm going to look at the very high profile topic of fracking and consider whether, by contrast, the implications may, in certain respects, be at risk of being overstated. Let me start by giving you a very short précis of the history of the Energy Act to show where it came from and why. Its roots derive from the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in 1997. It's the seminal international treaty which sets binding obligations on industrialised countries to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. In 2008, the Climate Change Act received royal assent in the UK, making it the duty of the Secretary of State to achieve a 34% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, as against 1990 levels, by 2020, and an 80% reduction of those levels by 2050. At the forefront of achieving this is the Energy Act, which received royal assent in October 2011. Whilst many of the provisions are now in force, some key provisions, including those I'm going to focus on here, are outstanding. The Act has three principal objectives: tackling barriers to investment in energy efficiency, enhancing energy security, and enabling investment in low-carbon energy supplies. However, the key issue within the Act for our purposes today is the future restriction on letting property that does not meet certain energy performance standards. The Act states that restrictions must come into force by the 1st of April 2018 in England and Wales, and for Scotland no earlier than 1 April 2015. The restrictions on letting apply both to residential and commercial properties, with limited exceptions. Whilst the Act does distinguish between domestic and non-domestic properties, the provisions for each are broadly the same. Section 43 of the Act relates to domestic properties and Section 49 to commercial. The wording of the Act is clear. The Secretary of State must make regulations that prevent those properties which fall below energy efficient standards from being rented until the landlord has complied with his obligations under the Act. Energy performance is determined by a property's Energy Performance Certificate, or EPC. An EPC is a short document that contains information about a property and how efficiently it uses energy. It is produced using a standard layout and uses standardised measures, usage patterns and performance criteria to enable properties of all shapes and sizes, ages and configurations to be compared objectively in terms of their energy consumption and their impact on the environment. This isn't a self-regulated process. An accredited energy assessor must conduct the EPC assessment. An EPC assessment gives each property its energy efficiency rating. The most energy efficient properties with the lowest fuel bills will have a rating of A. The least energy efficient will be a grade G. The level at which the bar for renting properties will be set is not found in the Act itself and will be set by regulation. However, the Department of Energy and Climate Change has indicated that it will be set at an E rating. This means that commercial and residential properties that are rated F and G after April 2018 will not be able to be let unless and until improvements are made. So, how many properties could this affect in practice? It is estimated that roughly 20% of residential and 20% of commercial buildings have EPCs of F or G and would therefore be unlettable in 2018. More will be rated E, which could be a borderline assessment if the EPC assessment process continues to become more stringent. There will therefore be a large number of properties which will need an energy refit in order to comply with the Act. Commercial property owners, pension funds and individuals who have bought to let will have to ensure that their properties become energy efficient before the 1st of April 2018 if they want their properties to be capable of commercial or residential letting. It would be a mistake to assume that this is an issue only for older properties. One surveyor recently encountered a building constructed as recently as 2005 which will be unmarketable under the Act. Since April 2012, it has been an illegal requirement that any property marketed for sale or rental must have an EPC attached to the property particulars. I would therefore recommend that all property owners should ascertain whether they have an EPC assessment on the property and what, if anything, needs to be done as a consequence. Each EPC is accompanied by a recommendation report which sets out the measures that would improve the energy performance of the building. So, what does this all mean? The most obvious implication of the Act is cost. Jones Lang LaSalle uses the example of a 50,000 square foot typical 1980s multi-let office building in a regional city centre with original plant, windows and lighting. They say this is the typical property stock that will be vulnerable under these regulations. Upgrade costs, they estimate, could vary from $25,000 to $75,000 for a quick fix to around $1 million for renewal of all lighting, heating and cooling in the building. Implementation of the minimal quick fix measures may not carry a massive cost in relation to capital value for one commercial property, but landlords with a significant portfolio should consider spreading capital costs between now and 2018. The government solution to assist landlords that cannot afford the upfront costs is to use Green Deal funding, also a provision of the Energy Act. The coalition government introduced this flagship initiative which enables energy efficiency improvements to be made to properties using finance from accredited providers to remove the upfront costs. Green Deal funding is available for both commercial and residential properties. A key issue of Green Deal funding is that it does not attach to the property owner or the borrower, but rather to the property. The money is repaid through energy bills, irrespective of property ownership or who originally took out the loan. Let's take an example. A buy-to-let property owned by Mr. Landlord and occupied by Mrs. Short-Term Tenant requires £25,000 worth of work to improve its energy performance from grade F to grade C. Mr. Landlord contacts one of the approved Green Deal providers, such as British Gas, EDF or B&Q, who then design, organise and undertakes the works to improve the property's energy efficiency. Perhaps it's loft insulation, draft proofing or maybe cavity wall insulation. That work is guaranteed to improve the property's energy efficiency immediately and therefore to reduce the heating bills with immediate effect. However, that saving does not instantly benefit Mrs. Short-Term Tenant. She will still pay the same amount each quarter. The actual money saved is passed by the energy supplier to B&Q or whoever to pay off the Green Deal funding used to undertake the work. Only once the loan is paid off will Mrs. Short-Term Tenant see any reduction in her heating bills. Or if it's not Mrs. Short-Term Tenant who lives there by then, it will be Mr. New Tenant who gets the benefit. However, no doubt his rent will be greater to reflect the energy efficient nature and reduced heating bills of the property. For a Green Deal measure to be eligible for finance, it must meet the golden rule. This means that the expected financial savings resulting from the works undertaken must be equal to or greater than the cost of repayment over the term of the Green Deal plan. The repayment period may be the lifetime of the measure or a specified payback period. This therefore allows properties to be retrofitted with energy efficient improvements at no upfront cost to the property owner. This scheme is obviously a considerable step in enabling property owners to be able to finance energy saving improvements. However, potential hurdles arise where the property in question doesn't meet the golden rule, i.e. those properties where the retrofits will be too expensive to be equated to the savings which can be achieved through energy bills. For example, it may actually be cheaper in some circumstances to demolish an older building rather than carry out energy efficient improvements where the cost is unlikely to be clawed back through energy savings over a realistic period. The upfront cost to do the work may simply be unaffordable and will not be eligible for Green Deal finance. It's fair to say that Green Deal finance has been the subject of both praise and criticism because of the lack of protection it gives to subsequent purchasers of properties already subject to Green Deal finance, together with the interest rate being charged at more than 7%, which is, of course, significantly higher than currently available in the commercial marketplace. However, finance available in the marketplace would be personal to the borrower, not the property. Ed Davey, Energy and Climate Change Secretary, commented recently that it's clear that Green Deal assessments are helping people to make their homes more energy efficient. This is hugely encouraging and exactly what the Green Deal is designed to do. So, what are the implications for the insurance industry? At inception, it will be important for brokers and underwriters to gain an understanding of the current energy performance of a property, and if the property falls short of an E rating, whether there are plans to remedy the situation. The closer we get towards April 2018, I can see that it will become strongly arguable that failing to disclose that a commercial or domestic rental property had an EPC rating lower than grade E will be a significantly material fact. That said, under the new Consumer Insurance Act, it will of course be down to the insurer to ask consumers a specific question on the point, and it will probably be sensible for insurers to do the same for commercial insureds too. Issues then arise at reinstatement. An insurer pays for the actual replacement or repair of a property so that the property is rebuilt to mirror as closely as possible the property as it was before the damage occurred. It is, of course, common to see European and public authorities clauses to extend reinstatement provisions to include the additional costs required to enable a property to be rebuilt in accordance with current guidelines. Policy terms will have to be examined regarding reinstatement to ensure there is no argument that an insurer is inadvertently obliged to pay for bringing the property up to energy efficient standards to enable the property to be let. Let's take another example. If next week a fire destroys a property, under current regulations it does not need to be energy efficient. However, the insured may wish to take advantage of the destruction of the property to make significant changes to ensure that it is energy efficient in preparation for 2018. The insurer and adjuster will therefore have to liaise with the insured and make it clear what work will be paid for by the insurer and what amounts to betterment. Insurers may see these incoming requirements as an opportunity to offer a new product to the market, which acknowledges the incoming changes and which will provide reinstatement of an energy efficient nature, at, of course, the appropriate premium. The requirements of the Act will have an obvious effect on rental stock. If owners fail to get to grips with the requirements of the Act, the value of properties will fall and may simply become unrentable by 2018. The remaining rental stock may be able to charge a premium, and the insurance market may suffer overcapacity. As a knock-on effect, unoccupied buildings are likely to increase, either whilst improvement works are being carried out, or if the landlord is unable to bring the property up to the required standard. This is perhaps an area to which claims handlers should be alert. With arson being the largest cause of fire losses in commercial buildings and the third largest cause of residential fires, claims handlers should again be on high alert with such incidents. It may simply be cheaper to burn a property down than spend the money to make it energy efficient. I would suggest that an energy inefficient building should feature as a very strong fraud indicator going forward. So, in conclusion, the Energy Act 2011 will have a significant impact on domestic and commercial policyholders, brokers, property insurers and adjusters. Landlords will need to ensure that their properties are energy efficient by the 1st of April 2018. Property owners may be eligible for funding through the Green Deal. And finally, insurers need to review their underwriting criteria, levels of indemnity and claims handling procedures. The second topic that I would like to look at is fracking. As a new environmental development, it has already prompted many column inches, especially recently around the Balcombe site in West Sussex. On the one hand, the promise of energy security with domestic supply at affordable cost is hugely appealing. There are, however, a number of concerns being raised following experiences in the US. My aim today is simply to set out the facts behind the technology so that the real risks to the insurance industry can start to be assessed. Back to basics. Fracking, which is short for hydraulic fracturing, is a technique for recovering gas from sedimentary shale rock made possible by relatively new technology. Conventional fossil fuel extraction uses direct drilling into reservoirs in rock formations such as sandstone, into which the gas or oil has migrated. Shale rock is both harder and more dense than the likes of sandstone and prevents the gas trapped in it from congregating in one place as you find with traditional reserves. The development of fracking technology has finally allowed the recovery of this trapped shale gas, which has always been known to be there. For insurers, the operations introduce a number of additional processes which insurers need to take into account in assessing risk, including, crucially, the high-pressure injection of significant quantities of water into wells. A hydraulic fracture is likely to use between 10 and 30,000 cubic metres of water per well. Let's look at this whole process in a bit more detail. The fracking process can be broken down into the following key stages. First, operators drill down vertically up to 4 kilometres to reach the gas-bearing rock. They then drill horizontally to follow the layer of shale lengthways. Explosions designed to perforate the well walls then create a series of holes about 1 centimetre wide. The key stage then follows as fracking fluid is injected into the well at high pressure, causing the rock layer to crack and create the fissures in the rock. You can see these on the slide branching out, up and down from the end section of the horizontal well. The fracking fluid is made up of 98.5% water, 1% sand and 0.5% of a cocktail of chemicals to clean the well, reduce friction and prevent bacterial growth and corrosion. The sand, called the proppant, literally props the fractures open. The chemicals vary depending on who is carrying out the drilling. Finally, the gas then flows through these fissures into the well and back up to the surface where it is collected for distribution to the grid. The UK Onshore Operators Group published for the first time in February 2013 industry guidelines covering best practice for shale well operations in the UK. The next slide shows a table of chemicals typically used in the US. A number of those which can be used are recognised carcinogens. Whilst 0.5% may not sound like much, it is not insignificant when you consider the quantity of water that will be introduced and remains in the ground. One key distinction between here and the US is that in the US the chemicals used on each occasion are proprietary, like a secret recipe. In the UK, however, the chemicals will need to be fully disclosed. To my mind, this is a good example of us learning from and building on the early experiences in the US, hopefully leading to a healthier and safer future for fracking in the UK. Looking then at regulation more generally, a number of consents have to be obtained before an operator can drill or carry out fracking to explore for shale gas in the UK. It is important as well to note that a distinction needs to be drawn between the exploration stage and the later extraction stage, which I'll come back to in a moment. The various consents include consent from any landowners whose land will be affected by the exploration. This includes landowners under whose land the well will be drilled, as the extensive horizontal drilling is another key feature of fracking for shale gas. This in itself is not a simple issue, as the surface owner may not be the same person as the owner of the minerals below the surface. In the absence of consent, there may be ways to proceed through statutory compulsory purchase powers, but this will be both time-consuming and costly. A petroleum exploration and development licence, which grants rights to explore and drill within a specified area. Planning permission. There may also need to be an environmental impact assessment submitted, an environmental permit, an abstraction licence if water for fracking is to be taken from nearby surface waters or groundwater. Well consent and notification, which considers well integrity and site safety. The relevant regulatory authorities therefore include the Department for Energy and Climate Change, the Health and Safety Executive, the Department of Communities and Local Government, local planning authorities and the Environment Agency. In July 2013, the Environment Agency published a draft consultation on technical guidance to clarify which regulations apply in relation to exploration and what operators need to do to comply with those regulations. The consultation closes on the 23rd of October, following which a final version will be published later in the year. Once an exploration project has been successful, the operator will want to progress to production and extraction. This will require further consents again, roughly following those just outlined, although even more extensive. So, how far along the process have we got in this country? Whilst the UK shale gas industry is still in its infancy and has not passed beyond the exploratory phase, it will be wrong to think that there has been no experience of fracking to date. In fact, over the past 30 years, more than 2,000 onshore wells have been drilled in Britain, approximately 200 of which have been hydraulically fractured to enhance the recovery of oil or gas. Gas is thought to be present in a number of different locations, but two prime areas are the Upper Bowland Shale in Lancashire and the Weald Basin running from Kent through Sussex to Hampshire. There is to date no accurate assessment of total UK reserves, but the British Geological Survey has recently estimated 1,300 trillion cubic feet, 40 trillion cubic metres, of gas is present, although not necessarily extractable, in the Bowland Basin. There is a suggestion that we may even have enough reserves to compete with natural gas giants like Russia, Qatar, Iran and the US. To give a financial steer, a report from PwC in February 2013 stated that exploiting shale in the UK could increase GDP by up to 50 billion by 2035. So far, there have been two well-known shale gas explorations to date, at opposite ends of the country. In August 2010, Quadrilla Resource Holdings Limited began drilling for shale gas in Priest Hall near Blackpool. The following April and May, following fracking operations, earthquakes were felt in the Blackpool area on two occasions, one a magnitude of 1.5 and the other 2.3 on the Richter scale. As a result, a moratorium was imposed on fracking operations pending investigation. In April 2012, the Department of Energy and Climate Change published a report which concluded that the earthquakes were induced by the fracking. However, the report said that there was no reason to stop fracking if its recommendations on how to mitigate the risks of earthquakes were adopted. Finally, in December 2012, a ministerial statement lifted the moratorium and set out a number of new controls to strengthen the existing regulatory framework. In August 2013, drilling was started by Quadrilla at Balcombe in West Sussex. This was the focus of large protests from environmental groups and local residents. Nevertheless, drilling was successfully completed on the 23rd of September, and we understand that the well is now closed off as Quadrilla applies for planning permission to come back and test flow rates. The industry estimates that it will have to drill 20 to 40 wells over the next 2 years in order to establish the commercial viability of extracting shale gas in the UK. How does this experience compare with what is happening in the rest of the world? In the US, the first well was fracked in 1947, but this only involved a small amount of water at lower pressure and into a vertical well only half a mile deep. There are, however, now roughly 500,000 shale gas wells in the US, with a further 11,000 being drilled each year. Today, 20% of their natural gas production comes from shale gas, and its trajectory is set to increase. In contrast to here, however, most of the wells are in sparsely populated areas. The position is the complete opposite in France and Bulgaria, where fracking has been banned despite the potential for considerable reserves. In Poland, a key development area, regulatory, technological and infrastructure constraints remain an issue. However, by the end of 2012, they had 33 exploration wells completed, 10 of which have been hydraulically fractured. In Argentina, it is thought there are significant shale gas reserves, close to 774 trillion cubic feet. But we understand that the regulatory burden is proving quite significant and delaying exploration. Finally, in China, early this year, 16 companies won a second round of bidding to explore 19 shale gas blocks. Estimates as to the amounts of shale gas vary significantly, however, from as much as 200 trillion cubic metres to a more restrained 36 trillion cubic metres. There are again various issues that need to be resolved, including proximity to population centres, transportation and the existing water crisis. So, what are the issues? Where does this leave insurers? Listed on this slide are some of the key parties involved in the fracking process. Time and again in the US, the real wrangle is between three of them: the fracking contractor, the drilling contractor and the operator. Liability is difficult to determine, especially when you take into account that any well may have been fracked on a number of occasions, creating different horizontal offshoots, by different parties and may be among a number of wells in any location. Depending on the geology of the site, it is not necessarily the closest well that is going to be at fault either. On the next slide are some of the obvious covers that will be relevant in a comprehensive insurance programme. There are, to my mind, however, two risks that are mentioned time and again that I would like to focus on today. These are seismic tremors leading to first-party claims and environmental liability. This next slide shows some typical first-party property damage allegedly caused by seismic events. In the mineral extraction and energy industry, tremors and subsidence are nothing new. In August 2002 and 2007, Manchester experienced several earthquakes caused by the Pendlefield Fault. Those earthquakes, including one measuring 3.9 on the Richter scale, were linked to coal mining in the Lancashire Field. A report by the Royal Academy of Engineering in June 2012 said that there is an emerging consensus that seismic activity induced by fracking would only be felt by a few people and would only result in negligible, if any, surface impacts. This was developed by a Durham University study in April 2013, which said that almost all the seismic activity was on such a small scale that only geoscientists would be able to detect it. The Department of Energy and Climate Change reported in July this year that there are no documented cases of shale gas operations causing subsidence or earthquakes large enough to cause damage at the surface. Shale gas production does not remove large quantities of rock from underground, so compaction and subsidence would not be expected. Nevertheless, looking to the US for examples of how this issue may play out, a number of earthquake lawsuits have been filed during 2013, claiming damage to property, including cracking or separation in concrete, tiles, walls, ceilings, brick facings, hardwood floors, the unlevelling of foundations, doors that will not close, and cracks in swimming pools. Whilst the damage might be clear, causation certainly isn't. Moving on to environmental liability, this is, to my mind, a much greater issue. There are, of course, the opportunities for spills. Even where the damage occurs in a single incident, the clean-up process could take anywhere from several years to many decades. The size and complexity of underground geological systems and the difficulty of locating the contamination will be a significant issue. The key scenario for me, however, centres around water contamination from escaped gas, by, for example, leaking through well casings that have been inadequately designed or constructed. Let's look at well construction in a bit more detail. The next slide shows a cross-section of a well pipe in situ. First, the well is drilled, then the pipes are inserted. Concrete is then injected down the middle of the pipe and pushed through like liquid in a syringe so that it backfills the gap between the casing and the hole in the ground. It is all too easy to see how voids can occur between the casing and the hole, thereby allowing the gas to escape. A study commissioned by the US Environmental Protection Agency said that shale gas has leaked from wells into surrounding groundwater in Pavilion, Wyoming, where the well casing was poorly constructed and the shale formations were very shallow. A wider study is now being carried out, and their report is expected in 2014. As for litigation in the US, in Fiorentino versus Cabot Oil and Gas Corporation, 19 American families sued for violations of both state and common law. The plaintiffs alleged that the company released combustible gases into their domestic water wells, causing elevated levels of methane in their water. They also cited 3 significant spills within a 10-day period and explosions due to the accumulation of gas. The oil company sought to dismiss the plaintiffs' claims, but they were unsuccessful in doing so. A confidential settlement agreement was signed in August 2012. Is this perhaps a taste of things to come? The next 2 slides provide some visual examples of the concerns being raised in the US. The first shows the condition of some drinking water close to a fracking site. The next shows water being set alight as it comes out of a kitchen tap due to the levels of gas in the water. Causation is again key, however. It is vital to establish the level of methane naturally present in water before fracking takes place in the area. The British Geological Society has been undertaking a national survey of methane levels in all prospective areas for shale gas in England and Wales. This will enable environmental regulators to understand pre-existing background methane levels and monitor future levels where permits to frack are granted. So, in conclusion, back to where I started. In my view, the Energy Act raises a number of very real issues for property owners, brokers and insurers, all of whom need to act now to stay ahead of the game. Fracking provides an exciting opportunity. For my money, the real focus needs to be on environmental liability cover and the gap between coverage and potential exposures. Proof of adherence to best industry practice will be critical. Environmental liability claims have been around for a long time, and the insurance industry knows how to deal with them. However, there remain a lot of unknowns and conflicting information about shale gas operations. If something goes wrong, we are still to find out how big a problem it could be in the long term. Finally, in preparing the fracking section of this talk, I'm very grateful for the valuable practical assistance I received from Arthur Carlisle of Rimkus Consulting Limited. And I must also credit Al Gramberg and ProPublica for the fracking process graphic I've included. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.